The king, being informed hereof, and much incensed, both for the contempt of his royal proclamation and authority, and damage to his exchequer, to which all the goods and debts of the Jews, being usurers, belonged, commanded his chancellor to inflict due punishment upon the authors of this sedition. Whereupon, after Easter, the bishop of Ely, the king's chancellor, gathering a great army together, came to York to apprehend those as malefactors who had destroyed the Jews of the city. And understanding that this was done by the command of the sheriff and governor of the castle, he put them both from their offices, and took sureties from the citizens of the city, for to keep the peace of the king and kingdom, and to stand to the law in the king's court concerning the death of the Jews, and commanded the soldiers of the county, who were at the destruction of the Jews, to be apprehended. But the chief of them, flying into Scotland, escaped, not one of them at all being put to death for this great massacre and riot. Henry de Knighton, de Eventibus Angliae, gives this censure of these slaughters and popular tumults against the Jews. The zeal of the Christians conspired against the Jews in England, but in truth not sincerely, that is, for the cause of faith, but either out of emulation and envy because of their felicity, or out of gaping after their goods. The justice, truly, of God, not at all approving such things, but decently ordering them, that by this means he might punish the insolency of a perfidious nation. He likewise adds, that one John, a most bold Christian, flying from Stanford with many spoils of the Jews to Northampton, was there secretly slain by his host to get his money, and thrown without the city in the night, the murderer flying thereupon. After which, through the dreams of old women and fallacious signs, the simple people, attributing to him the merits of a martyr, honored his sepulchre with solemn vigils and gifts. This was derided by wise men, yet it was acceptable to the clerks there living by reason of the gains, which the bishop hearing of, presently unsancted him, and profaned the monuments of this false martyr, continued by the study of simple and covetous persons. I wish no such plunderers as this might be sancted and adored in our age, as too many of them are, even before their deaths, who will be unsancted after them, as well as this bold plunderer of the Jews. Mr. Fox, in his Acts and Monument, Volume 1, page 305, relating the story of the massacres of the Jews this year out of the Chronicle of Westminster, saith, there were no less than 1,500 of the Jews destroyed at that time in York alone, besides those slaughtered in other places, so that this year, which the Jews took to be their jubilee, was to them a year of confusion. Neither was this plague of theirs undeserved, for every year commonly their custom was to get some Christian man's child from the parents, and on Good Friday to crucify him in despite of our religion. King Richard I, after his return out of the Holy Land in the year 1194, appointed justices, laws, and orders for preventing the frauds and regulating the contracts of the Jews, both between themselves and between Christians and them, thus recorded at large by Mr. Roger de Hoveden, and briefly touched only by some others. All the debts, pawns, mortgages, lands, houses, rents, and possessions of the Jews shall be registered. The Jew who shall conceal any of these shall forfeit to the king his body, and the concealment, and likewise all his possessions and chattels, neither shall it be lawful to the Jew ever to recover the concealment. Likewise 6 or 7 places shall be provided, in which they shall make all their contracts, and there shall be appointed 2 lawyers that are Christians, and 2 lawyers who are Jews, and 2 eagle registrars, and before them, and the clerks of William, and the church of St. Marie, and William of Kimili, shall their contracts be made, and charters shall be made of their contracts by way of indenture. And one part of the indenture shall remain with the Jew, sealed with his seal to whom the money is lent, and the other part shall remain in the common chest, wherein there shall be 3 locks and keys, whereof the 2 Christians shall keep 1 key, and the 2 Jews another. And the clerks of William of St. Mary's Church, and William of Cumili, shall keep the third. And moreover, there shall be 3 seals to it, and those who keep the seals shall put the seals thereto. Moreover, the clerks of the same William and William shall keep a roll of the transcripts of all the charters, and as the charters shall be altered, so let the roll be likewise. For every charter there shall be 3 pence paid, one moiety thereof by the Jew, and the other moiety by him to whom the money is lent, whereof the 2 writers shall have 2 pence, and the keeper of the roll the third. And from henceforth no contract shall be made with, nor payment made to, the Jews, nor any alteration made of the charters, but before the said persons, or the greater part of thee, if all of them cannot be present. And the aforesaid 2 Christians shall have 1 roll of the debts, or receipts of the payments, which from henceforth are to be made to the Jews, and the 2 Jews 1. And the keeper of the roll 1. Moreover, every Jew shall swear upon his roll that all his debts, and pawns, and rents, and all his goods and possessions he shall cause to be enrolled, and that he shall conceal nothing, as is aforesaid. And if he shall know that any one shall conceal anything, he shall secretly reveal it to the justices sent unto them, and that they shall detect and show unto them all falsifiers or forgers of charters, and clippers of moneys, where or when they shall know them, and likewise all false charters. By these strict politic laws, the king and his officers knew the particular wealth, moneys, goods, debts, and real and personal estates of every Jew, and in whose hands they were, and so could seize and command them at their pleasure, upon any real or pretended misdemeanors or complaints against them. King John, in the year of our Lord 1210, commanded all the Jews of both sexes throughout England to be apprehended and imprisoned, and to be afflicted with most grievous torments, so that they might satisfy the king's pleasure with their money. Some of them, being grievously tortured, gave all things which they had, and promised more, that they might by this means escape so many kinds of torments. Amongst whom 1 Jew, at Bristol, punished with various torments, when, as he would neither redeem himself nor submit to any fine, the king commanded his tormentors that they should every day pull out one of his grinding teeth, until he should pay to the king 10,000 marks of silver. And when at last, for 7 days' space, they had pulled out 7 of his teeth, with intolerable torment, and now on the 8th day the tormentors had begun the like work again, this Jew, an overslow provider for his profit, gave them the aforesaid money, that he might save the 8th tooth to himself, the other 7 being pulled out, who, with much more wisdom and less pain, might have done so before, and saved his 7 teeth, having but 8 in all. In the year 1222, in a council at Canterbury, under Archbishop Stephen, a certain apostate Jew, made of a Christian a deacon, and afterwards apostatizing, was there judicially punished, whom Falco, presently apprehending, caused to be hanged, as Matthew Paris writes, but Bracton and others record that he was burned to ashes. King Henry III, anno 1230, wanting moneys, constrained the Jews, whether they would or would not, to give him the 3rd part of all their movable goods, and that with all expedition. The Jews in the year of our Lord 1231, building a synagogue very curiously, but the Christians obtained of the king that it should be dedicated to our blessed Lady, and was since by the same King Henry granted to the brethren of St. Anthony of Vienna, and called St. Anthony's Hospital. In the year of our Lord 1233, King Henry III, at his proper cost, built in London, not far from the old temple, a decent house and church, sufficient for a convent, with other convenient edifices thereto belonging, called the House of the Converts, to which house the converted Jews flying, leaving the blindness of Judaism, under a certain honest rule of living, might have a certain habitation, a safe refuge, and a sufficient livelihood during their whole lives, without servile labor and the gain of usury. Whereupon it came to pass that in a short time there was gathered together to that place a great number of converts, who were there baptized and instructed in the Christian faith, and lived laudably, being governed by a skillful rector, specially appointed for that purpose. King Henry, in the year 1235, keeping his court and the nativity at Westminster with many of his bishops and nobles, there were brought before him, upon the complaint of John Toley, 7 Jews who had circumcised a certain child in Norwich, whom they had stolen away from his parents and kept for a year's space from the sight of Christians, intending to crucify him on the feast of Easter. But being convicted for this fact, they confessed the truth of the thing in the king's presence, and so being at the king's pleasure, both for their life and members, were detained in prison for this fact, and some of them drawn and hanged. In the year of our Lord 1240, the Jews circumcised a Christian child at Norwich, and being circumcised, they called him Journinus, but reserved him to be crucified, in contumely of Jesus Christ crucified. But the father of the child, from whom the Jews had stolen him, diligently seeking after his son, at the last found him shut up in the custody of the Jews, and with loud clamors declared that his son, whom he thought to have been lost, was wickedly kept in the chamber of a certain Jew. Which great premeditated wickedness, coming to the knowledge of the bishop, William Raleigh, a prudent and circumspect man, and of other great men, lest through the slothfulness of the Christians so great an injury of Christ should be passed by unpunished, all the Jews of the city were apprehended. And when, as they would have defended themselves by regal authority, the bishop said, "These things belong to the church, and are not to be determined in the king's court, seeing the question to be discussed is concerning circumcision and the breach of faith." Whereupon 4 of the Jews, being convicted of the aforesaid wickedness, were first dragged about at the tails of horses, and at last hanged on the gallows, lamentably breathing forth the reliques of life. Lamentably breathing forth the relics of life. The very next year, the Jews in foreign parts, especially in Germany, believing that the Tartars were of their own nation, entered into a secret league with them to destroy the Christians and subdue the whole world to themselves, to which end they provided many hogsheads filled with arms to be transported to the Tartars, pretending to the Christian princes that there were vessels filled only with poisoned wines, wherewith they intended to poison and destroy the Tartars, who would drink no wines, but such as were made by the Jews, but this their treachery being detected by the customers in Germany, who found these pretended vessels of wine to be fraught with arms for the Tartars, wherewith to destroy the Christians. Thereupon the Jews were delivered to tormentors, to be perpetually imprisoned or slain with their own swords, as Matthew Paris more at large relates, in the year 1241, page 564. King Henry, in the year 1243, exacted a great ransom from the most miserable Jews, both in gold and silver, so that besides what he exacted from others, he extorted from one Jew, Aaron of York, 4 marks of gold and 4,000 marks of silver, the king himself receiving the gold with his own hand from every Jew, man or woman, being made of a king a new receiver of custom, but the silver was received by others for the king. Anno 1244, in August, the corpse of a little male child was found buried in the city of London, in whose thighs and arms and under his paps there was a regular inscription in Hebrew letters. To which spectacle, then, as many resorted, admiring at it, and not knowing how to read the letters, knowing that the letters were Hebrew, they called thither converted Jews, who inhabited the house which the king had founded in London, that they, as they loved their life or members, for the honor, love, and fear of the Lord their King, without figment of falsehood, might declare that writing. For the king's bailiffs and conservators of the peace were present. They likewise believed, neither without cause, that the Jews had either crucified that little child in obloquy and contumely of Christ, which was related frequently to have happened, or had afflicted him with sundry torments to crucify him, and when he had given up the ghost, they had now cast him there, as unworthy of the cross. Moreover, there appeared in his body blue marks, and rents of rods, and manifest signs and footsteps of some other torment. And when as those converts were brought to read those things that were inscribed, and studied, that they might perfectly read them, they found the letters deformed, and now not legible, being many ways disordered, and tossed up and down, by reason of the extension and contraction of the skin and the flesh. But they found the name of the father and mother of the little child, suppressing their surnames, and that the child was sold to the Jews, but to whom or to what end they could not find. In the meantime, certain of the London Jews took a secret and sudden flight, never to return again, who by this very thing rendered themselves suspected. And some assumed that the Lord had wrought miracles for the child, and because it was found that the Jews at other times had perpetrated such wickedness, and the holy bodies crucified had been solemnly received in the church, and likewise to have shined brightly with miracles, although the prints of the 5 wounds appeared not in the hands and feet and side of said corpse, yet the canons of St. Paul took it violently away, and solemnly buried it in their church, not far from the great altar. The same year, 1244, the barons in Parliament ordered that there should be one justice at the least appointed for the Jews by the nomination of the Parliament. In the year of our Lord 1250, King Henry III, burning with a covetous desire, commanded money to be extorted from the Jews without all mercy, so as they might seem to be altogether and irrecoverably impoverished, exacting what monies soever they had in their chests. Notwithstanding, although they were miserable, yet they were pitied by none, because they were often proved and convicted to have been counterfeiters, as well as of monies as of seals. And to pass by the monies of others, we shall only mention one, that their malice may the more appear to many. There was a certain rich Jew, having his abode and house at Berkhamsted and Wallingford, Abraham in name, not in faith, who was very dear to Earl Richard, who had a very beautiful wife and faithful to him, named Flora. This Jew, that he might accumulate more disgrace to Christ, caused the image of the Virgin Mary, decently carved and painted as the manner is, holding her son in her bosom. This image the Jew placed in his house of office, and which is a great shame and ignominy to express, blaspheming the image itself, as if it had been the very Virgin herself, threw his most filthy and not to be named excrements upon her, days and nights, and commanded his wife to do the like, which when his wife saw, after some days she grieved at it by reason of the sex, and passing by secretly wiped off the filth from the face of the image most filthily defiled, which when the Jew her husband had fully found out, he therefore privily and impiously strangled the woman herself, though his wife. But when these wicked deeds were discovered and made apparent, and proved by his conviction, although other causes of death were not wanting, he was thrust into the most loathsome castle at the Tower of London, whence to get his freedom he most certainly promised that he would prove all the Jews of England to have been most wicked traitors. And when, as he was greatly accused almost by all the Jews of England, and they endeavored to put him to death, Earl Richard interceded for him, whereupon the Jews, grievously accusing him both of the clipping of money and other wickednesses, offered Earl Richard 1,000 marks, if he would not protect him, which notwithstanding the Earl refused, because he was called his Jew. This Jew, Abraham, therefore gave the king 700 marks, that he might be freed from perpetual imprisonment, to which he was adjudged, the Earl assisting him therein. The king, thereupon, at the same time, sent the justices of the Jews throughout all England to search out all their money, both in debts and possessions, and with them a certain most wicked and merciless Jew, that he might wickedly and falsely accuse all the rest against the truth, who verily reprehended the Christians, pitying and weeping over the affliction of the Jews, and called the king's bailiffs lukewarm and effeminate, and gnashing with his teeth over every Jew, affirmed with many great oaths that they could give twice as much more to the king than what they had given, although he most wickedly lied against his own head. This Jew, that he might more effectually hurt the rest, revealed all their secrets daily to the king's Christian exactors. In the meantime, the king ceased not to scrape money together from all hands, but principally from the Jews, so that from one Jew alone, born and living in York, called Aaron, because he was convicted of falsifying a charter, as was reported, he extorted 14,000 marks and 10,000 marks of gold for the queen's use, for a little time's respite, that he might not languish in prison. All which sums being paid, it was found out that this Aaron had paid the king, since his return from foreign parts, 30,000 marks of silver, and 200 marks of gold to the queen, as the said Aaron, upon the attestation of his honor and faith, averred to Matthew Perry, who records it. Yet notwithstanding, although the Jews might be pitied, yet were they pitied by no man, seeing they were corrupters and counterfeiters of the king's money and of charters, and manifestly and frequently proved, condemned, and reprobated as such. Philip Lunel, clerk, called to the service of the king, and addicted to the custody of the Jews, in the year 1251, was grievously accused before the king, his adversaries affirming that when he and Nicholas of St. Albans clerk were sent towards the northern parts to tax and squeeze the Jews, he privily received most precious vessels from a certain Jew, that he might spare him his tallage to the king, and he likewise took secret gifts from others, that he might spare them, and that he oppressed these Jews notwithstanding, to the damage of the king, and the violation of his faith. Whereupon, the king, being very angry, commanded Philip himself to be unworthily handled, until he should satisfy him for this great transgression. Philip hereupon, a crafty and circumspect man, humbly craved advice and assistance from the Lord John Mansell, the king's prime counsellor, concerning his great tribulation, because he had promoted him to the king's service, who effectually procured that he recovered the king's favour, giving him a great sum of money for it, 1,000 marks, as was reported, yet notwithstanding he was removed from his office, and not a little disgraced. It seems the king's officers could fleece the Jews in that age by secret bribes and gifts, as well as himself by intolerable exactions. King Henry III, to satisfy the Pope's desire in taking a voyage to the Holy Land in the year 1252, extorted from the Jews whatsoever those miserable wretches might seem to have, not only by scraping or excoriating, but even by unbowelling them. Being also an hydropical thirster after gold, he so greedily sucked talents, or bullion, or jewels, as well from Christians as Jews, that a new Crassus might seem to be raised from the dead. And this very year Robert de la Hole, to whom the king had committed the custody of the Jews, and of the seal which belonged to the exchequer, was grievously accused before the king, being charged with this crime, that he had oppressed the innocent son of a certain knight by a certain false charger, confirmed with the seal, of which the said Robert, justice of the Jews, was the bearer and keeper. Whereupon he was basely apprehended, and committed to a close prison, and defamed with the like scandal wherewith Philip Lunel, but the year just before, had been entangled in the snares of the perfidious Jews, who was then their justice. At last, by the great labor of his friends, the malice of the Jews is detected, but the innocency of the said Robert, then set free, scarce declared. Whereupon, being put from his offices, he openly paid 4 marks of gold, at least, for his fine. This very year, 1252, there came out of the Holy Land a mandate from the King of France that all the Jews should be expelled out of the realm of France, and condemned to perpetual exile, with this clause of moderation added thereto, but he who desires to remain, let him be an artificer, or a handicraftsman, and apply himself to mechanical artifices. For it was scornfully objected to the said king by the Saracens that we did little love or reverence our Lord Jesus Christ, who tolerate the murderers of him to live among us. In the year of Christ, 1253, November 10th, the obligatory charter wherewith the abbot and convent of St. Alban were held bound for the debt of Richard de Oxey, knight, was taken out of the hands of Elias, the London Jew, and freed out of the chest, and it was proclaimed in the school of the Jews at London, where it seems they had then a school, that the foresaid abbot and convent should be quit from all this debt against them, from the beginning of the world until then, as the statute obtained by them protesteth. The Jews in Northampton, about the year of our Lord 1253, had among themselves prepared wildfire to burn the city of London, for the which divers of them were taken and burned in the time of Lent in the city of Northampton. In the year 1254, King Henry, after Easter, so cruelly raged against the most miserable people of the Jews, that they loathed even to live, and when they were called together, Earl Richard exacted of them, for the use of the king, who was in great want, no small sum of money, under pain of a most loathsome prison, and a most ignominious death. Elias, therefore, of London, high priest of the Jews, taking counsel with his companions, answered for them all, who had frequently paid very great sums of money, whether they would or would not. O noble lords, we see undoubtedly that our Lord the King purposeth to destroy us from under heaven. We entreat for God's sake that he would give us license and safe conduct of departing out of his kingdom, that we may seek and find a mansion in some other place, under some prince who bears some bowels of mercy, and some stability of truth and faithfulness, and we will depart, never to return again, leaving here our household stuff and houses behind us. How can he love or spare us, miserable Jews, who destroys his own natural English? He hath people, yea, his own merchants, I say not usurers, who by usurious contracts heap up infinite heaps of money. Let the king rely upon them, and gape after their emoluments. Verily, they have supplanted and impoverished us, which the king howsoever dissembles to know, exacting from us those things we cannot give him, although he would pull out our eyes, or cut our throats, when he had first pulled off our skins. And speaking this with sighs and tears hindering his speech, he held his peace, falling almost to an ecstasy, ready to die. Which when it came to the knowledge of the magistrates, they permitted them not to depart out of the realm, saying, Whither will you flee, O wretches? Behold, the King of France hateth and persecuteth you, and hath condemned you to perpetual exile, shunning Charybdis. You desire to be drowned in Scylla. And so the small little substance which was left to them for their mean sustentation was violently extorted from them. King Henry III, in the year 1255, exacted with great earnestness from the Jews, although very frequently impoverished, 8,000 marks to be speedily paid unto him under pain of hanging. But they, seeing nothing else hanging over them but destruction with confusion, answered all unanimously, Sir King, we see that thou sparest neither Christians nor Jews, but studiest with crafty fetches to impoverish all men. We have no hope of respiration left us. The usurers of the Pope have supplanted us. Permit us to depart out of thy kingdom with safe conduct, and we will seek for ourselves such a mansion as we can, be it what it will. Which when the king had heard, he cried out with a querulous voice, saying, It is no marvel if I covet money. It is an horrible thing to imagine the debts wherein I am held bound. By the head of God they amount to the sum of 200,000 marks, and if I should say of 3, I should not exceed the bounds of truth. I am deceived on every side. I am maimed, an abridged king, yet now but an halved king. For having made a certain estimate of the expenses of my rents, the sum of the annual rent of Edward my son amounts to above 15,000 marks. There is therefore a necessity for me to live on the money gotten from what place soever, from whomsoever, and by what means soever. Therefore, being made another, Titus, or Vespasian, he sold the Jews for some years to Earl Richard his brother, that those whom the king had excoriated he might eviscerate. Yet the earl spared them, considering their abbreviated power and ignominious poverty. The same year, about the feast of Peter and Paul, the Jews of Lincoln stole a child called Hugo, being 8 years old, and when as they had nourished him in a certain most secret chamber with milk and other childish aliments, they sent almost to all the cities of England wherein the Jews lived, that in contempt and reproach of Jesus Christ they should be present at their sacrifice at Lincoln. For they had, as they said, a certain child hid to be crucified. Whereupon many assembled at Lincoln, and coming together they appointed one Lincoln Jew for the judge, as it were for Pilate, by whose judgment, by the consent of all, the child is afflicted with sundry torments. He is whipped, even unto blood, and lividness, crowned with thorns, wearied with spittings and shriekings, and moreover he is pricked by them all with poniards, made to drink gall, derided with reproaches and blasphemies, and frequently called by them with grinding teeth, Jesus, the false prophet. And after they had derided him in divers manners, they crucified him, and pierced him with a spear to the heart. And when the child had given up the ghost, they took down his little body from the cross, and took the bowels out of his corpse. For what end is unknown, but it was said it was to exercise magical arts. The mother of the child diligently sought for her absent son for some days, and it was told her by neighbors that the last time they saw her child whom she sought, he was playing with the children of the Jews of his age, and entered into the house of a certain Jew. Whereupon the woman suddenly entered that house, and saw the body of the child cast into a certain pit. And having warily called the bailiffs of the city together, the body was found and drawn forth, and there was made a wonderful spectacle among the people. But the woman, mother of the child, complaining and crying out, provoked all the citizens there assembled together to tears and sighs. There was then present at that place John de Lexington, a circumspect and discreet man, and moreover elegantly learned, who said, We have sometimes heard that the Jews have not feared to attempt such things in reproach of Jesus Christ, our crucified Lord. And one Jew being apprehended, to wit, he into whose house the child entered playing, and therefore more suspected than the rest, he saith unto him, O wretch, knowest thou not that speedy destruction abides thee? All the gold of England will not suffice for thy deliverance or redemption. Notwithstanding, I will tell thee, although unworthy, by what means thou mayest preserve thy life and members, that thou mayest not be dismembered. I will say both to thee, if thou dost not fear to discover to me whatsoever things are done in this case without falsehood. Whereupon this Jew, whose name was Copan, believing he had thus found out a way of escape, answered, saying, Sir John, if thou makest thy words good by thy deeds, I will reveal wonderful things to thee. And the industry of Sir John, animating and exciting him thereto, the Jew said, Those things are true which the Christians say. The Jews almost every year crucify one child to the injury and contumely of Jesus, but it is not found out every year, for they do this secretly, and in hidden and most secret places. But this child, whom they call Hugo, our Jews have most unmercifully crucified, and when he was dead, and they desired to hide him, being dead, he could not be buried in the earth, nor hid. For the corpse of the innocent was reputed unprofitable for divination, for he was unbowelled for that end. And when in the morning it was thought to be buried, the earth brought it forth, and vomited it out, and the body sometimes appeared inhuman, whereupon the Jews abhorred it. At last it was cast headlong into a deep pit, neither as yet could be kept secret. For the importunate mother, diligently searching all things, at last showed to the bailiffs the body she had found. But Sir John, notwithstanding this, kept the Jew bound in chains. When these things were known to the canons of the Church of Lincoln, they requested the body to be given to them, which was granted them. And when it had been sufficiently viewed by an infinite company of people, it was honorably buried in the Church of Lincoln, as the corpse of a most precious martyr. The Jews kept the child alive for 10 days, that being fed for so many days with milk, he might living suffer many sorts of torments. When the king returned from the northern parts of England, and was certified of the premises, he reprehended Sir John, that he had promised life and members to so flagitious a person, which he could not give, for that blasphemer and homicide was worthy of the punishment of many sorts of death. And when, as an unavoidable judgment was ready to be executed upon this offender, he said, "My death is now approaching, neither can my Lord John preserve me, who am ready to perish. I now relate the truth to you all. Almost all the Jews of England consented to the death of this child, whereof the Jews are accused, and almost out of every city in England, wherein the Jews inhabit, certain chosen persons were called together to the immolation of that child, as to a paschal sacrifice. And when, as he had spoken these things, together with other dotages, being tied to an horse's tail, and drawn to the gallows, he was presented to the aerial cacodemons in body and soul, and 91 other Jews, partakers of this wickedness, being carried in carts to London, were there committed to prison, who, if so be they were casually bewailed by any Christians, yet they were deplored by the Caracini, the Pope's Italian usurers, their corrivals with dry eyes. Afterwards, by the inquisition of the king's justices, it was discovered and found that the Jews of England by common counsel had slain the innocent child, punished for many days, and crucified. But after this the mother of the said child, constantly prosecuting her appeal before the king against them for that iniquity and such a death, God, the Lord of revenges, rendered them a condign retribution, according to their merits. For on St. Clement's Day, 88 of the richest and greatest Jews of the city of London were drawn and hanged up in the air upon new gibbets, especially prepared for that purpose, and more than 23 others were reserved in the Tower of London to the like judgment.